Dirk, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Great. Thanks, Brad. It's an honor to be here.
What is creative resilience?
Creative resilience is a framework that we're working on developing, and this is where we position creativity as an operative mechanism to help individuals gain agency. When we think about creativity, we have a lot of misconceptions about it. And for years, if we look historically at creativity, it is something that was initially relegated to very few people who were touched by God, so to speak. And then there's other people who were considered mad people, insane in a lot of ways, because they were creative and functioning outside of a normal box, so to speak. So the creativity piece is something where by engaging in a creative process, the flow state, this allows people to see solutions. And in the creativity becomes something that separates the individual from the external. And I know that a lot of times when we deal with challenges and we're faced with difficult situations, we can internalize the problem, and the problem can appear to us that it's something wrong with us rather than here are some external factors that we're dealing with. An example I like to use in talking about creative resilience is using filmmaking as a metaphor. I studied film. I was a filmmaker for years, still am. I dabble, and I've taught film for 27 years. In this process, understanding creativity is if you have a film set that everybody is there, everybody's ready, but then your actor doesn't show up, or you're expecting a sunny day, but it's raining. You don't send everybody home. There has to be an opportunity. There's this external challenge. And then you have to find creative solutions as to how to approach that. That's a little easier because you're doing this with a group of individuals and it's not just one person. And so it's that community that I think becomes very strong in the creative process. So the individual becomes a little more different because we all have our internalization processes that some are dysfunctional, we found ways to do this, but it really is about finding that separation and then approaching this challenge from a creative perspective.
And by doing that and coming up with that creative solution under pressure, we become stronger and more resilient.
Exactly. And so then it becomes the piece of reflection. I think any part of experiential learning is we have to experience something and then we have to reflect and learn. And by learning, then we can actually use this to help us tell us our story better. So our story becomes about how we use creativity in order to find a way around a solution. And then that becomes more ingrained in us. And we can start learning this process of how to flip to that mode in order to find that difference in that solution rather than stay in that lost space that we can sometimes get into.
You said something so interesting that I've never thought about, that creativity was potentially quite limited as we evolved because only those who had the space to not be interacting with direct human needs, hunting, gathering, well, I suppose there can be a little bit of creativity there as well, but to actually create space to think and rewrite our stories, that required enough resources and the tribe protecting you enough so that you could truly be creative and paint on the cave wall or whatever it was. But for those who are wondering or who think I'm not creative, what would you say to them?
I have a small private practice where I do help adults manage their careers and make career changes. And I frequently get questions, people coming to me, how do I be more creative? Or I'm not creative. I met with one individual one time who was doing database work and he really enjoyed the database work, but he said, I really want to be more creative. And I said, tell me about the work you do. He was creating formulas. He was hacking Excel. He was doing changes to the database. And I said, do you realize that this is creativity that you are demonstrating? And so again, I think it's this misconception that everybody thinks, I want to be creative. So I want to sit in front of an easel and paint. I want to go make a film. I want to take pictures. Those are all that's a practice. And if we think about a practice, what is the practice and how do we externalize our creativity? All creative anyway, because we can be sitting here and we can think, okay, if I won the lottery, what would I do with these winnings? You do that, you're being creative because you're coming up with creative ideas. You're dreaming at night. Every dream, that's an element of creativity, and some of it is voluntary, some of it's involuntary. So I think we all possess creativity, but we've never been taught what it really is or how we can actually use it as a skill and something that can help us as we navigate these drastic changes we're experiencing right now.
So creativity is always there. It's just whether you recognize it in what you're already doing or create space for it. And for many of us, we do have the luxury of a little bit more space. We're not fighting lions and tigers or running away from enemy tribes. There is often space to create something new, to visualize a different outcome. I mean, that's creativity as well, isn't it? Just changing how you think.
Exactly. I think that it's harder to access today because there is such a huge upheaval in the world as far as the world order. And I think we're all affected by it. We're experiencing collective trauma again on a global scale. And with this, we get into survival mode. And I think that I love your analogy, the idea that we had people protecting us on the outside so we could go paint on a cave about what was going on the outside. Or maybe that was a journal entry of what I did today. It's like painting, but it's those external safety mechanisms that are crumbling right now and they're being challenged and stressed. And so as a result of this, how comfortable can we be to sit in the cave and paint when there are so many other things out there in the world? And so I think there's an element of how some of these challenges could be uh, applying creativity and creative solutions to that. I think in a more social way is very important. And where I think in a time when we have a lot of gifts, because since we have these standard or these, how can I say this? We have these structures that we've relied on for so many years, and now they're crumbling. What's going to be next? What is a new? And I believe that us finding ways to embrace our creativity and start to implement new ideas, there can be new ways to create a stronger society, a stronger government, just stronger communities to start with, I think would be really important.
Yeah, yeah. So we need the truly creative, and everyone has that capacity to actually start painting different pictures of what might happen, which maybe is what the paintings on cave walls were all about. You see the animals running across the savannah, and perhaps that was someone reminding the tribe, hey, it's going to get better. This is what is possible. And everyone looks at it and goes, wow, once upon a time there were herds, and then the ice age ends and they come back again. And thankfully someone kept the dream alive. And maybe that's what we need right now. There's more of those storytellers.
I agree, because it's story that brings us together too. And, when we're sharing stories that we can relate to, that becomes even more important. It's a way we record our culture, and it's the way we record changes in society and also personal changes. So those stories, I think, are crucial.
So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for those wondering, who is Dirk Matthews?
Okay. Uh, So I'm currently the president of the National Career Development Association. We are the preeminent career development organization. A lot of our work is about career development research. We do certifications and trainings for individuals who are seeking to provide career development to others. And I'm also the senior director of alumni relations at Columbia College Chicago, where I've also been working and started teaching 29 years ago in the film department. And then I worked for 20 years in the Career Center in various leadership roles and then moved into development and alumni relations. A lot of the creative resilience work that we're doing, I think, comes from my experiences as being a filmmaker, photographer, myself being an artist, and looking at different approaches, weaving in psychology. One of the pieces that, it's the film and psychology piece, I think is something that always fascinates me. When I was in film school, took a class on Alfred Hitchcock. And even though it wasn't a Hitchcock film, we were supposed to use psychology to talk about a different film. And so I wrote this paper that I'm still proud of to this day, that Poltergeist was actually a demonstration of the primal screen theory. And so I don't know if you're familiar with primal screen therapy, but the idea is that you lead people to a catharsis, which I think that was great then. Catharsis can be rewritten and talked about in different ways. But really, if you look at different film structures, and so that kind of really drove me towards becoming a therapist. And eventually I became a licensed therapist and I worked for several years. And I ended up translating my career, my therapy background into teaching and career development.
What is transactional career work versus true career development?
I think the history of career development is something where it was usually about I need to find a job. And so what you're doing is you're kind of starting with near the end of a problem rather than starting at the root of the problem. So for me, career development is really about an individual finding their calling, finding an understanding of what they do. And I think one of the pieces that's really important is understanding transferable skills. So I think about this in my work at Columbia College, Chicago, where there's alums that I have met with that they were saying they were painting in college and they don't have a creative practice now. They're not using those skills and they're disappointed with their career and unfulfilled. Yet you find other individuals that say were in a creative practice and maybe even if they're not painting, even if they're not making films, but they found a way to translate that passion for a skill into something else. And so I think higher education is a very difficult situation because parents want to see how many of your students are getting hired. The problem with that, we know students in college, their brains are still developing. And to ask them to decide what they want to do for the rest of their lives is kind of almost letting them down because we're putting expectations on them. And I get that that's very hard. And so it's very difficult to navigate that. The core piece is if you have a clearer sense of your identity and you come out of any experience, then you're better able to make decisions. And then you can get a job that might be, well, this isn't the job I want eventually, but I'm using skills that I really enjoy and they make me happy. Feel accomplished when I do this job. Those are the pieces where there's an element that call it creativity, call it something else. But that I think is a different way to look at it. And I think a lot of places are starting to do that on a more substantial level. I also think the term career is very difficult for someone who is just starting out and say, you're going to build this career. You know, what does that mean? And so you hear people who are talking about their careers, and when they talk about the career, it's this reflected moment where if we have someone who is highly successful come and talk to students, we're hearing a story about how they got somewhere. And so it's really they're sharing their career. But for students, it's almost like you're starting out to create this story. And so I think that we need to kind of rethink what the term career is, what that means, and is there a different way to approach the term so that way it becomes something more accessible. I think similar to creativity. Creativity is a similar piece that people can say, I'm not creative, but probably you spend 5 minutes with someone, you talk to them about some of the things they do, you're going to hear a creative individual because we all have this instinct.
Maybe a better way of looking at it is your story or your journey rather than a career, which sounds rigid and it comes with that feeling of, well, what if I fail to achieve this, as opposed to this is an opportunity to grow into who it is that I really am.
Exactly. You know, and it's interesting. I've been reading a book by James Hillman that talks about the aging process and how character is revealed as we age. And really, you know, you hear the story of, oh, cranky old people and things like that. And then you hear stories of people who, as they get sweeter and kinder as they get older. And,
Yeah.
you know, that is an interesting approach that I think some people do, that their personalities. So how do we access that when we're younger? We don't. I think we have to kind of trust that we're making some decisions that are going to lead us to that, and that we are
Yeah.
kind of building this out. So we have decisions, a series of decisions that lead us to that. And sometimes I think decisions get made intuitively, and I think that that's okay. We hear about that gut response, but also there's times when intuition and a gut response could be more of maybe a negative reaction to something that may be a situation where you're being challenged. So kind of went off topic there a little bit, but I think it's really this, that piece of, what is the journey?
Mm,
Where are we going? And I think journey is something that's also a little bit loaded from a terminology, but I think it's key with where I think we need to be thinking of what career actually is.
yeah. And it's a little bit of a worry. I'm not sure if it is something to worry about, but apparently the number one career aspiration for young people is influencer. And that is on par with, in terms of being successful, with acting or writing. Only the top 5% can actually create a career out of it. What would you say to a young person who thinks the only path is to, become an influencer? Because I do think there are many ways to achieve recognition, extrinsic value, but rather focus on the process, do something worthwhile. I don't know. What would you say to a young person who's aspiring to be an influencer and be famous and rich?
Well, there's a lot to break down there. I know in arts and media colleges, we have a lot of students that come in and they are studying because they want to be the next big thing. The saddest thing was having a student come to me as they're graduating and say, I'm looking for a job as a director.
Oh.
There aren't film director positions just lying around out there. There's a whole process for that we won't get into
Yeah.
today. But so I think of the influencer, look at what they're really, if we break that down, and what is that really about? It's someone who is an authority on something, somebody who has an impact and an influence on other individuals. So there's a level of persuasiveness. There's a bit of coolness because they want to be hip and cool. So I think that idea of being an influencer, getting in and working with that individual from that place of, okay, here's what you're looking for. What is that experience? That may not pan out. Let's look at some other things you can do or ways you could go about it. I had a student years ago who said, when we talked about career aspirations, it's like, I'm going to win an Academy Award. And it's like pushing. What do you really want to do? Academy Award. It's like, no, I want to be an Academy Award. And their whole goal was right around being an actor and winning this award. He's very active as a horror film actor and, someone who is achieving a lot of success and is content with what he does, but it wasn't that exact piece. And so I think that's where we start like really breaking down these big aspirations. That's great. You might get there, but you also could win the lottery. So how are you going to pay your rent until you win the lottery? And a
Mm,
lot of people, if they're resistant to that discussion, it's really hard to help them and assist them. And then it's more about, well, here are ways you could start your own podcast. That's kind of my thought of the influencer, because there is
mm,
something really powerful behind that. And there's a storyteller, someone who wants to, be respected and known. And to me, there's a sense of identity that gets built out of that. So how do you help someone build an identity that they could be an influencer in their community? And that in
yeah.
itself is like a first step. And then they can
Mm.
start working towards that larger aspiration.
Absolutely, totally agree. And let the fame be a side effect of mastering your craft rather than be the thing that you're seeking, because it can lead to quite a lot of suffering. Whereas if you just focus on, I'm going to be the best at making desserts and I'm going to publish a video every day to show my journey making desserts. There's a lady called Lauren Skips, and during COVID, she learned to skip with a jump rope, and she recorded her videos and they started off really bad and she was learning as she went. Now she's sponsored by Nike and all of these brands and she's a huge global success. She gets flown all over the place, but she started by just learning the basics and recording the journey, and no one followed her for the first 3 years.
Wow. Yeah, I think that that's great because also I think the bigger your aspiration, the longer the timeline is for that. And obviously you can get discovered and that discovery is a wonderful thing. But
Yeah.
also there's a lot of people who are discovered after years and years and years. And I think that's where creative resilience comes in because it really is this piece. And I've seen people give up and say, well, I'm not going to make it in this, whatever that dream, that aspiration is. And
Mm,
so they go and they take something that's easy and then they're unsatisfied. But the piece is that creatively stepping back and looking at, okay, well, I'm not doing this because this is an incredibly competitive field. This is a very difficult job to get. So what am I going to do until then? And how can I find excitement in my life without this possibly unattainable goal? I mean, you want to keep the goal, obviously, but you
yes.
gotta kind of put it into perspective. And I think that's that creative resilience piece
Mm,
where it really comes in that, yeah, you want something, but you have to plan for it. And I think too, another point I thought about when you were bringing up your question is there's an old adage, and this is, I think, where people used to be, do what you love, the money will follow. The answer is do what you love if you're good at it. And that's been more of the discussion lately. And I think it's important to frame what we're discussing here. And so this is where flipping it from what do you love to what are you good at and what are the skills that you possess? And then let's see what the story is of how you've actually demonstrated that skill. And what is your feeling? What is your reaction to your behavior when you actually engage in that skill in that process?
and recognize you may have to do work or at least things that you don't enjoy as a way to support yourself as you're developing those skills. Because Brad Pitt was wearing a chicken suit for, I can't remember, but quite some time before he got an audition and actually started to land acting roles. Maybe his looks helped with that journey slightly. There are some talents that you might have, but yeah, there's often a long journey. I mean, J.K. Rowling rejected so many times, waiting tables, so sometimes you have to do the hard thing as well as practice, and that's going to be pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it is that, and it's where's that resilient? How are you going to keep going when it's hard?
Yes.
And
Yes.
especially if you want to, I mean, my wife's a musician and, I know musicians, I know filmmakers and people that are constantly, they're still sticking with this. And, they do it because they love it and they want to get somewhere and some success, but it takes a long time sometimes,
Mm,
especially now we're so inundated with content. And so, you listen on a streaming service to someone's release. Think, I really like that. And then there's 20 more new releases and you listen to
yeah.
those and it's like, wow, what was that thing I listened to last month that I really liked? And you can't remember because there's
Yeah.
so much more content. And we deal with this in every way right now because we're bombarded with it. And I think coming back to that center, understanding even how we consume things is really important because
Mm,
there's a shift now with the newer generation about wanting the physical object. When you have a record, that record is part of your collection and it's something physical that you can see. When you have a book, it's not something you read on your kid. You have the book on a shelf and there's something tactile about it. And that builds a connection. And I think that's again back to this idea of, you know, when we experience something in the physical world, it changes the way we experience it.
that's such a nice idea. Yeah. I didn't think about it like that. Actually having something there. I have had this strange phenomenon recently where I'm even just scrolling a feed on LinkedIn, for example, and something stands out and I go, oh, that's good. I'm going to come back to it. And when I reopen the app, it's gone. And there's
It-
this weird feeling of loss, like I'll never find it again. It's just lost in this river of ideas and content. Yeah, we're overloaded with stimulation and less real stuff in our environment, which is, yeah, it's a call to action to purchase the book. or to at least try real world experiences rather than just experiencing everything by the screen.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk about multipotentialism. What is that?
So multipotentialism is a term. Um, I have to look up the woman's name, but I can do that in a minute
No
to
worries.
say her name. But it's a term that came up that was about individuals that have multiple interests in multiple fields. So I think, if we come back to career development, we think about, okay, it used to be linear. We had to choose one thing and then we have to go and do this. So, and this is where I think a lot of people can learn from arts and media students and people who pursue arts and media careers, because frequently, back to that story of seeking fame or seeking the break, seeking success, you have to do other things. And
Mm.
I think another piece is I have students come to me and adults come to me and say, well, I can't make up my mind. I'm really interested in these 3 areas or these 5 areas. And it turns out they're actually kind of good at all of them. I'm like, well, why don't you try them all and see
Mm.
which one sticks? And I said, the good thing about it is you're going to get a better understanding of yourself. You may learn how all these things connect. The bad thing is you're going to go crazy trying to manage all these different things. And so the woman that came up with this, she came up with the term. She was working with a lot of people on the spectrum, people with ADHD. And so obviously it's great for people with ADHD because we probably have a lot of different interests. But I do also believe that we are inherently interested in multiple things. So I think like, you know, baking. I mean, we all have hobbies and some of those hobbies should stay hobbies, but we also have areas where we have demonstrated that I can go out and I can make a film and I can take a photograph. I can go out and code a database. There are all these ways that, and I also think it's a way to honor who we really are. Because if we just pick area and we stick with it, I think we cut off other parts of ourselves. I think some
Mm.
people are really good at one thing, but there are other people that are good at many things. And so that's where it's difficult to have that journey because that journey might be longer and might have a lot of different detours, but it also has the ability to be very rewarding because they're not sitting there 20 years from now saying, wow, I really wish I would have done that. It's about people
Yeah.
that have tried it at least to understand what it is instead of it sitting there and it being something in their imagination. Again,
Mm.
creatively thinking about a career that they may have in this area. They've actually had that experience, and that experience can inform any decisions that they make down the road.
Yeah. And giving people permission to do exactly that, because the old advice was stay in your lane, pick one thing, become an expert. But I actually think it's the generalists or people who are not necessarily in the top 1% of any specific field, but who can synthesize across them because they're interested in all these things. That's a superpower. You're the only one who sits at that cross section and you can make a career out of that. I mean, I think that's what I've done. I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in biology. I'm interested in the human experience. I'm interested in high performance. And maybe if it comes to talking about all of that on a stage, there are not that many people who can do that. And I wouldn't have got there if perhaps because of ADHD to some degree, but if I hadn't followed all of those, and yeah, sometimes you do overload yourself, and I still find myself trying to go deep into something that I probably shouldn't. But ultimately, accepting that makes me who I am, I suppose.
Exactly. And you honor those parts of yourself. And I think you use the term permission. And I think that is so important that we give ourselves permission to do that and we give others permission to do that. And I
Mm.
know that, from the career perspective, it's, a lot of times again, it's hard to convey that to people because they want to see something. I want to see results. I want to see a job. I want to see, it's this piece of instead of like, what is your journey of self-discovery going to be? And then what are you going to do? What are the decisions and how are you going to make money? in that area. What is your livelihood and where does it come from? And so there's also a lot of hybrids. I think that I have an organizational consulting background. So this is because I love systems, and that came from working in film and understanding a film set and the processes and how that there's a system to making a film and how a set is run and organized, and then seeing how different organizations responded to change. So yet at the same time, I'm out with my camera taking photos and working for an architect, taking some photos of the work that they are either in the process of or have completed building, providing career advice, teaching. So, I mean, it is that piece that we have to really get to that point of giving ourselves permission to explore these things. And I think you're right, because if we're generous, we kind of function in a liminal space. In the world, it's hard for people functioning in a liminal space to find a place to really excel. And I think we find this with artists and filmmakers and musicians because they're all functioning in this liminal space too. They're creating this work. They don't always have a place for it to be shown, but then they're out. It's almost like having a double life or sometimes
Mm.
triple or quadruple life because you have to go and work in a corporate setting, and then you go home and you write this really, you know, thrashing rock song, or you do a beautiful classical piece. So I think that it's that piece that is really important for us to remember.
I still sometimes feel slightly embarrassed about the fact that my real passion is fiction writing. And it's not embarrassment, it's just that in the circles that I navigate, especially the corporate world, what would someone think if this guy that they've paid to talk about the future of work, he's going to release a novel next year? Like, what? How can you even be serious? Like, who is this person? And that's something I'm working through. I'm going to have to own it because that is what I'm doing. I'm releasing it. I've worked on it for 12 years, and I think it's what I have always been working towards. And if it doesn't work, that's fine because I love the process, and I'll probably just write another one. But how do you reconcile that, like being authentically who you are?
Yeah, I think that that is a challenge because when we start, I mean, imposter syndrome is something that's been talked about before. It's very common in today's lexicon. And I think that that is one of the pieces. So, we don't believe ourselves yet that we can be an author of fiction. And especially when people see, and I think this is different. And I first experienced this when I was in undergrad studying film, and I was really interested in directing a film, and I was doing a lot of cinematography shooting film. So it's like, I want to direct, I want to direct, I want to direct. People would just say, yeah, well, I've got a film. I need a camera person for you free, and so no one would really take me seriously. And that's because I wasn't taking myself seriously. And I ended up doing a couple of short experimental films, and that kind of satisfied my venture into directing back then. But I think it's that piece of also how other people see you. And so this is where I think community becomes really important, that we need to go to the communities. So where is that community of fiction writers you can go to that can see you? Oh, you're a fiction writer that does this other stuff. You're going to the people that are seeing your work as a nonfiction writer, workshop presenter, and then, oh, wait, you're going to do this. And so, I think it's also about managing parts, these parts of ourselves and nurturing those parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that I think is where you can start developing that resilience too, because you have other people with you that are encouraging you. And a lot of writers, you get into accountability. How much did you write? How much did you say you were going to write? So
Yeah.
that's my thought about that shift is really important, is to surround yourself with people who are actually doing that specific thing.
I love that. That is such a great way to frame it. The people who see you as the writer first, the author first, who does other stuff rather than the other way around. Community, in fact, that's why I think community is the first step to resilience, and everything else is having that fellowship, as I call it in my flame model. But it's having the community around you and then shaping the story and then figuring out, well, how am I going to get this done? What a nice idea. Where does meditation and spirituality fit into the creative process?
Well, I'm a longtime meditator. I've been doing Tai Chi for a long time. And I think that what that's done is it's allowed me to actually see a lot of what I'm able to now start describing. So like what is that place? Years ago I was working with a career coach myself, and they were asking is what is the one thing you need? What is the one skill that you can't live without? And, there's all these like teamwork and, all these different, I said, being centered. And I got a strange look. I'm like, what do you mean being centered? It's like, yeah, because if I'm not centered, I'm not able to function at my best. And I had already started the meditation journey. And this was really something that it was really hard to describe and explain. But I think to feel that a lot of times if you can come at a problem and you are in your body in your present moment and have not get caught up in the emotions of it, even though there are emotions that we acknowledge and we experience. But if we can then kind of approach it from, okay, what is my solution going to be here? What am I going to do? How is my next step? And I think that that is really important with all this change because change is so hard for people. And when all of a sudden everything starts falling away that was so shoring everything up that we know and we live in, that disappears, we have to kind of bring that inside. And so we have to actually find a way to build that in ourselves. So we have that structure and that centeredness. And then how do we bring that out in the community? And I think that that piece also through my journey recently, actually it was a few years ago, author Meg Wheatley, she had um, a statement that this idea of responses to the changes in the world were that we have to create islands of sanity. And it becomes all about safe spaces. And how do we create a safe space for individuals to experience being present? So who are the warriors going to be, or the hunters, gatherers outside the cave, so we can actually be in that cave and tell the stories. We can actually paint on the wall if that's what we need to do. And then we have to go out and into that world. But
Mhm.
we all have to have those places where we can be safe. And if we can be safe within ourselves and our own skin, then we can better even trust when we're walking into a safe situation, or is there a possibility? So I also believe that when we're in that centered space, and in my work with the creative resilience, I do guided imageries, and, I talk a lot about the flow state and doing some surveys in that process of, beforehand, how connected are you with your creativity? And then we do the visualization and we do some work around that. And we come out and survey people again. Well, how connected are you? And there's like a 30% increase that I'm starting to see in people before and after the visualization. So it's kind of showing that meditation, that piece of slowing down. I think also this concept of active imagination that came from Jungian therapy. One of my mentors, good friends, Mary Doherty, has been doing a lot of work with active imagination and using journaling and art therapy to really dialogue with thought, dialogue with feeling. And some of this goes way back into art therapy, but some of it is very new and unique. And so all of this is about slowing the process down. And I think some people are maybe disconnected from creativity. They don't meditate, but they pray. And I think prayer, any type of spirituality that you're engaging in, whether it's a denominational or non-denominational, it's what brings you into your core, into your center, that allows you to function differently in the world. And that's a piece that's really difficult. So we were talking earlier, it's difficult to really measure the impact spirituality or things that are subjective, highly subjective, how those are actually experienced and how they impact us. And so I think these things are important for us internally to cultivate through spirituality, through meditation. Maybe it's the creative practice. Maybe it's going and drawing or writing, anything that kind of gets you into that state where, time can stop for a little bit of time.
Mm.
Or you can at least pay attention to what it is that you are thinking. Let the thoughts understand what you're thinking, see what you're thinking, and don't take it fully on. Feeling angry today, or I'm feeling really sad. Okay, that's a feeling. And that gets into more of the therapeutic, my therapeutic background, where it's, how do you find that separation in order to know a feeling is there, acknowledge it, and sometimes release it. Sometimes it's an action. Sometimes it's poof, you can set it away
Yeah.
by reframe. So
It just gives you more knowledge because, or no, it just gives you the ability to step back and realize you are not that thought. You are not that emotion. It's a signal, it's a pattern, and they're arising all the time. And you can almost look at it as if you're looking through a window and go, oh, okay, all of that stuff's going on. It doesn't have to control me. I have some options. And without creating that pocket of space, well, you're probably just going to be acting on default. The predictive brain is going to guide everything you do. And when it's correct, it goes, yep, that model was correct. My prediction was correct. And let's do that more. It reinforces the model in a way. So would you say to someone, create a dedicated rhythm in your life? For example, at a certain time, you will practice prayer or meditation or walking in nature, whatever it is, rather than just leave it to chance?
I think, yeah, I think that dedication, but also if you miss it, forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the big thing is I'm gonna do this every day. I never participate in, say, New Year's resolutions, because those are resolutions that are based on a lot of hope and aspiration. It's, if you can just
Yeah.
say, I'm gonna do something really good for myself 10 minutes every day, that's something that's attainable. I'm gonna
Mm,
write an hour every day. That's not attainable, right? Because we know how life gets. And so I think that that's an important thing to look at, is that, so my goal is I meditate for 10 minutes every day, and that's my goal. And then my wife and I listen to meditative music when we sleep, and just helps us drift off and let go of the day. But it's either a moving meditation or a seated meditation, and usually I do 20, sometimes 30 minutes. Sometimes I'll do it multiple times a day. But that is something that people don't give themselves credit for, that sometimes sitting in a chair and just staring out the window for 10 minutes, that is a way for your mind. And then if you couple breathing with it, that's a version of a meditative practice. And again, it depends on what you're committing to. But it's about, again, slowing everything down, relaxing the vagus nerve, really kind of looking at your breathing, and just being present and looking at things. Those little things can be enough to kind of help you cultivate this. And other people pray daily, and prayer is really important for some people. And with
mm,
that, for people to say, I'm going to pray every day, and that's great. That's the piece where, again, we all have our subjective way that we know how to access this. And some of us haven't found that way, and we need to try different things. And those are the people that are searching and trying different esoteric religions and processes, and maybe listening to one too many TikTok influencers about different things. But it's that quest, right? We have that quest, and when we find it, committing to it and making space for that in your life, and then also being flexible with yourself. I think it's been 10 years I've been meditating daily, and I've probably missed about maybe 10 to 15 days. And some of that was due to either recovering from surgery, other things with chaotic situations. But, I think it's, again, that piece of really finding that space. And,
mm,
a little context, how I started meditating was feeling intense anxiety about changes in the world and changes in the government. And that was where I just decided I don't want to feel this way every day. And I know I'm going to feel this way every day if I don't do something about it. And sometimes we have to just get to that point of, I want to experience life differently. And that sometimes can be our motivation.
And things have been changing rapidly across the world. And you spoke about collective trauma. Well, what does that mean? And what can we do about whether it's collective as a planet or collective as an organization?
So I think there's different levels of that. I think we're all experiencing it right now with, again, as I mentioned, the changes to organizational structure. I think it's just governmental structure, world orders are being
Mm,
drastically changed. Um, I think probably the best thing to look at is there's two instances. So 9/11 is one, um,
mm,
and then COVID. 9/11,
yeah.
even though it was on US soil, it still impacted a lot of people. And there's a lot of research around the time that people who were not there, but saw the footage replayed over and over again can fabricate memory that they were actually there, even if they were, say, they came to New York after and they saw still some of the aftermath. Um, and there is a collectiveness about that experience that I think shook a lot of the world.
Mm,
And then we had COVID, and COVID is something that really brought in a collective trauma of loss. And this is unspecified loss. So this loss is things where we've lost graduations, we've lost opportunities. Students lost the high school prom. We lost going to weddings. We lost seeing people before they die. And
yeah.
sometimes their death was a result of the illness. And there was a universal helplessness to all of this. And so as a result, we have, it's not like, so 9/11, we can pinpoint there was this event. We saw this event. We understand the repercussions. COVID has these lingering effects. And I know we're still dealing with medically long COVID. Psychologically, I think we're really dealing with long COVID because we all became insular. We had to be. And that insular drove us to connect with people, and we connected with unreliable sources. And so we have
Mm,
unreliable information coming out of that. And so this trauma is we still haven't gone back and looked at how deeply COVID has impacted us. And so
mm,
as a result, we see more division. We see a lot of unresolved trauma kind of running rampant in the world.
yeah.
And so that's then I think something, and I did a lot of research in this, that the idea of how COVID impacted organizations. And so again, I'm going to have to get the names of the authors of this, but there's a book about organizational trauma that was very compelling to me, and I understood it. And that the authors initially wrote the book because they were providing consulting to organizations that treated battered women. And so what they found is that there was, drawing a blank on the term, where you don't experience the trauma, but you're experiencing someone else's trauma. I'll come back to that. When you're exposed to someone else's trauma, you can become vicariously traumatized.
Mm,
So this vicarious trauma was impacting the organization to the point where there was dysfunction, there was a lack of communications, people were depressed, it was hard to get work done. And this was really fascinating study. And I think it's still not fully embraced because in some ways, um, you have to look at the organization as almost an organism, as it's like an extension of systems theory. But when you have something that is changing so rapidly within an organization, you can have a loss of culture, and that loss of culture brings down morale. And when morale
mm,
comes down, you have people gossiping, you have people who are more angry, you have people who are confronting, you have a lot of turnover because people are constantly leaving. And a lot of the research that I did showed that a lot of the organizations that failed, first off, I was fascinated by this idea that organizations had to stay alive, corporations had to stay afloat.
mm,
Yet, in order to do that, they had to ask unrealistic demands of the people who worked for them. Where was the balance between taking care of the people? Do you take care of the people and then lose the company? Do you take care of the company and potentially lose the people? It was the organizations that failed were the ones that already had structural problems. And
mm,
so it's this piece that, and I think we're seeing this in higher ed a lot. And speaking from inside higher ed, knowing a lot of people obviously working across the world in higher ed, especially in the US, there were structures, I believe, in higher education that were based on old models. And there definitely needs to be changes. But the process now is that there's a lot of institutes of higher education, especially in the last year with the acceleration of the US government's challenges to higher education and the value of it. There are rapid changes happening. And so we see that where there is the risk of loss of culture. What is an institution? What is the satisfaction of the employees? What is, even down to student satisfaction? Are the institutions that are losing students the institutions that are experiencing the highest level of organizational trauma? One of the things that really helps when you're going through rapid change, and any change actually, is communication. And I think that there's a lot of administrations across the country that are making, and this isn't just in higher ed, I'm calling it out because of my familiarity with it, but I think a lot of corporations, I think government, we're dealing with this, where things are happening so fast that there's not even an opportunity to really think about what the change should be. And so changes are made that sometimes appear unplanned, unfocused. And with this process, people become alienated and the trauma occurs. And so again, this is one of those, sometimes it can be a very like this unspecified trauma, similar to COVID, similar to the pandemic. And so how do we take an organization out of that and really put them into a place where there are changes that are made? Again, some of these are happening so rapidly that it just, there's no room for it to exist. But that's, again, I think both the collective trauma and the organizational trauma that we are experiencing. It's a big issue that we're, as a society, we're not ready to deal with. And that's
Mm.
where I think organizational consulting is so important, because someone who is providing organizational consulting and comes in and sees what the traumatic elements are can look at what are some pathways in order to heal and allow this. Is one of my mentors, Anthony Casablanca, has an organization. His organizational consulting is grief leaders, and they do work where they're actually going in and they're dealing with the emotions of individuals through change. And some of these are downsizing, and then like walking through people through a year of downsizing. So they know they're going to lose their job, but what are the process? What are the feelings coming up with this? So I believe there's humane ways to
Mm.
downsize. There's humane ways to do organizational change. And I think these are just, a few ways, and there's so many more opportunities for us to look at how to help various organizations.
It makes so much sense, especially getting that external perspective. It's just as with ourselves, we can't always process trauma all alone. You need that external guidance who can acknowledge the emotions in the room and help people process and tell a better story. Because
Yeah.
if all people hear is there's going to be a big change, I've experienced this as a resilience trainer or consultant. Get them ready, make people resilient because bad things are happening. People are quite intuitive. They sense that something's going on. And then some person comes along and says, okay, here's how to be calm. And they're going, well, why? And at least if there's a story behind it, we're about to go through some changes. This happens. It's natural. It happens in everyone's lives. It's happened over history. And we want to prepare you and make sure that you're going to be okay. Okay. That's a completely different situation to secret society in the boardroom knows something's up and you guys get prepared. It's just better storytelling.
I agree. I think that was really inspiring to find out more about your work, and how that has such potential for making a difference, because I do believe applying this in an organizational way, there's a lot of opportunities for that resilience mindset in order to, help, because organizations need to learn how to be resilient. Otherwise, we know what the solution is, or what the outcome, I should say, is,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
not always desirable.
So thank you so much, Dirk. If anyone is interested in connecting with you, following your work, where would you like them to go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Dirk W. Matthews. You can find me through my link tree, dirkmatthews.com. And that will pretty much connect you to my LinkedIn, my websites, and also you can see some of my photography work.
Excellent, excellent. For those who stuck with us all the way to the end, final thought, perhaps.
I am just really honored to be a part of this. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Brad, and I believe that, there's a lot of possibilities out there, and I think we sometimes forget that there are possibilities and that there are options. So, I just encourage listeners to, find those points of centeredness, find those opportunities for you to kind of be in practice. It becomes like a muscle to experience those moments of calm and that quiet, and then from there, look at how you can make decisions differently. I think that by us kind of slowing down a little to make our decisions and to e- engage our creativity, we really have an opportunity to make the world a better place.
Dirk, thank you so much. Everyone, check out the links in the show notes, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Dirk.
Thanks, Brad.